Start ready.
Yeah. Okay, so this second part, I appreciate the thing. I want to make a note to myself. The point that Talon made, to make sure that I start off with the right kind of context. I want to, make sure that that's a very good distinction that I wasn't making. About explaining reality versus explaining what I'm going to try to do as a good enough, like a thing, which is very distinctive, because I know that at the end of the day, I'm much more less knowledgeable on the actual workings of actual reality. Yeah. Again, assuming that this is actual reality, because I refuse to go off in any other assumption, because I'm going to just go with it.
So are you saying you want to, in a virtual setting, you just want to make it adequate?
Well, enough for the mind not to know the difference.
Right. Exactly.
And the thing is, it's, I think, a lot easier. It's a lot easier than I think people want to think about it, because
I mean, if a guy can stand in front of a bunch of people and pretend that he made something disappear, and people are like, "Oh God, yeah."
No, but I'm talking about, like, let's say if there was a way. Have you guys seen the movie Westworld?
I have not.
Okay, I want to give you a very brief scene. It's just a very brief scene, but there's this one point where one of the individuals was trying to convince another individual that they were indeed a robot, or like not the same as the non-synthetics. And the only way that this individual was able to get convinced was they handed them a tablet, and they saw this tree branch of thoughts. And as they were talking, it was showing where this tree branch of dialogue and the possible dialogues had come out. And as they were saying, it was selecting the dialogue as they were talking live. He goes, "No, this can't be." And they would pause, and then she would talk, and they would show all this. And in that scene, that individual short-circuited for a minute, and it went fine. It's not a critical moment of the show, so I'm not doing a major spoiler. But that was, out of all the proof that they could have gave that individual of them being synthetic, showing that a tablet seeing their thoughts being displayed. Yeah. It would be nice, or one of my objectives and my goal is if the reality you're perceiving now, that we already know that it's flawed and narrowed, if someone handed a tablet to you and they said to you, "The real Damien's in the real world. This is just a simulation because we've backed up his stuff," and you don't even know what memories really didn't make it through. There might be some memories that the original Damien has, but you feel complete now. You don't feel not you now. So the idea would be to create something in which that, unless you have, almost like the movie Inception, where you had that top as to let you indistinguishable, that you would not know whether or not. And it's not just me that are being drawn to this idea. We're seeing it more and more in pop culture, and I have on the third schema specific pinpoints of specific technologies that are working on specific things on it. But this is more on the biology of like the human mind and where consciousness lies. Because for the people who don't really care about the technology, and they're not making a debate on the metaphysics, they say the strongest argument for the neuroscience stuff is we still don't know exactly where consciousness is. Okay, so it's not something. If it's something that we still can't even quite. It's almost like back in the day when they felt that there was something that was passing on traits between parents, but they didn't know that genes existed. They assumed that genes could exist, but they hadn't seen it. Like from the time that they guessed that genes could exist to the time they found the first one was like 50, 60 years or something like that. Yeah. So same thing with consciousness. We know that it should exist, but we can't quite find exactly where. And I feel like as though that's one of the final puzzle pieces that I ended up having was I think I've cracked from a biological level. I think I've cracked the code for consciousness, and that was the final piece out of everything that I have written out that I could not quite figure out from a biological standpoint. How would you? Because unless you understand that thoroughly, you can't build it. I mean, you don't have to necessarily replicate all of the neuron connections necessarily, because so much of our brain isn't even dedicated towards consciousness necessarily. A lot of our brain is just maintenance, just keeping us alive. That was the thing about here about the 10%.
Yeah.
Some people say that we use 10%, and that's probably true if you're only talking about like personality or whatever makes you you. But if you're talking about stuff like keeping your body temperature, keeping your balance, like all this, and you're using 100% of your brain. It's just that whenever you're talking about things that have to do with memories or things that have to do with opinion or whatever the case is, that's usually just the frontal lobe that's doing all that activity.
It's frontal lobe and then prefrontal.
It's about 10%. It's not necessarily 10%, but the point is we're using all of our brain. Like if you had 90% of your brain damage, you'd be like dead. Yeah, you need all your brain working. But it's just the parts that relate towards human consciousness is probably only like about 10% of the brain. Because there's so much of the stuff, and we know this from head injuries, and anytime we end up having a more documented case of a specific injury to a part of the brain, and then we can see how it affects the individual afterwards, we have a better idea about where certain things are located, where there's language and stuff like that. I'm going to talk a little tiny bit about a keystone part, this part right here. A keystone part about the consciousness, and it segues over into the third part too. But there's some people who have cerebral palsy that shake so bad that and I don't know if they're still doing this method for a cure, but it's a very common one when the people are shaking so bad that the shakes alone would snap their necks or they bite their tongues. Like they have very limited options. So one way to solve this is they'll grab the brain and they'll cut the corpus callosum, which is the stuff that's connecting the two hemispheres, the left brain and the right brain.
Yeah.
And because there's some sort of like for the people who have cerebral palsy, some issue there specifically, and when they separate the two sides of the brain, the shaking stops because there was something wrong there. But something else happens, and this is what I think very telling for the people who are doing these experiments, and I'll have links to them and also videos of them. So if a person has their brain split, and they have like a panel right here blocking up the eyes, where the left eye, the right eye is seeing different things. If you put an object here on this panel and an object here on this panel, if let's say a toy car on the left and then like a banana on the right, and I were to say, what's in front of you? Even though you can see both of them, but the panel's right here, but you can see both objects, you will say the banana, and only the banana. You will not say the robot.
CGP Grey had a good video on it.
Yes, that right there, the U is too. That was the video that was, for me, the eureka moment, the apple falling down, because it was I'll explain a little bit more on how it relates on the technological spot, but on that video, basically, we have two minds. And there is the code analytical aspect, the left brain, that deals with language. Whenever someone has who are suffering over this ailment where their corpus callosum is cut, if they cover up their left eye and they see this individual, they won't recognize who they are. It's like a stranger to them. But if you do it the other way around, even if you don't know their name, emotionally you will call, it's the emotional intelligence that is done. But the emotional intelligence aspect of you has no voice. The voice that you hear inside your head is the left side that has everything linked to language. Thoughts that are linked to language, that often is trying to do its best to interpret what the right brain is thinking. And this is oftentimes why a lot of good ideas come after sleep, because you get a chance for the right brain to explain. Because sometimes the right brain perceives things that the left brain doesn't, because the left brain is not emotionally intelligent. Only the right brain is. It's just that it doesn't have words to speak. As I build the device, the machine, this is going to be one of the cornerstones of like the hardware that would mimic the human consciousness. But it's one of the reasons why we have so much conflict within ourselves, because the left brain will lie, Like, for example, if you say to this right hand to hand you like some duct tape, and he goes, "Why do you have duct tape?" If you look at the now the left brain is able to look at the duct tape, and it'll come up with a perfectly reasonable explanation on why. Yeah, it fills in it fills in the gaps.
Blanks.
Yeah, it fills in the blanks.
Even if it's like
Nonsensical.
you don't have enough information, it's nonsensical.
Yeah.
It's like with
But
dreams.
you don't know exactly
It's
like dreams.
Yeah. How dreams make perfect sense when you're dreaming and you wake up. You're like,
So the brain.
The way that our actual eyesight and vision
Yes.
works, our actual
or the holes that we have that gets filled in.
It's very small.
Sure.
Whereas all your peripheral is literally your brain simulating.
Yes, exactly right.
But that's why, like, people say I didn't see it coming. Well, because they literally
didn't. Right.
not.
No, so from a biological standpoint, it's a lot easier than a lot of people give credit for because we take for granted how much the brain cheats anyway. Like, you don't have to do it. You don't have to be 100% mirrored to the way the brain is. And when you do some of the VR, the experiences we'll end up having, you don't even have to have something that look realistic for your brain to just accept it like if it was real.
Right.
And the same thing with when you're dreaming. Some things it could be some nonsensical stuff, but if some part of your brain says accepts it as it is real, then you just accepted it that it's real.
I think what's freaky is when your brain is like, "This isn't real, but let's go with it."
Yeah, sure. Okay, so so from a biological standpoint, and I'll go into more details on experiments that I want to reference, like of research for each one of these findings, and not just repeat it because I saw it in a video, but I want to do my own research. I want to at least follow the same footsteps that these.
Wait, this isn't the part where you're gonna like inject us with stuff.
Not yet. I don't have it ready.
Oh.
So, and I'll try with homeless people first before I try with my friends because
white gloves at the lab. So.
Yeah. No. Besides, that would pose too many questions. It's not easier for me to get away with a stranger.
I didn't drink any of the water.
What wasn't that popular?
So, I have a little bit more about like how.
Where are we on?
Oh, we're good.
So I have a little bit more about like. So you hear about memories, perfectly lazy, about how the brain, will use shortcuts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Also about like that thing that I told you about the genome that we have, or not the genome, the biome that we have that affects our emotions a little bit because we're hungry for something. There's like we take it for granted about sometimes our emotions that we have aren't even genuinely ours, really.
Yeah, it's a
like we get influenced.
Some sort of stimulus.
Yeah, stimulus.
So that was a question that I wanted to ask him if you would address it because so you talked about left and right brain. We're talking about like our brain in our head, but there's a discussion in the the health and fitness industry where
Don't act like you're a doctor.
I'm not a doctor.
You can act like this is my pocket. Yeah.
This isn't me. This is just stuff that I've encountered. It's like there's the
we gave our credentials before we got started. Everyone's on board and where we are. Yeah.
Yes, totally. Trust me. There's the discussion of what we call the chemical brain.
Yeah.
So that includes your biome. Like you know, when people talk about they're hangry, they get upset and they're like, "Why am I upset?" And then you go through a series of questions. You realize, "Oh, I haven't eaten in 7 hours."
Right. So it's almost like people try to I guess overestimate how valuable they feel their oneness is, their individuality is, when so much of it is either made up or influenced heavily.
Yeah.
So there probably is free will, but not a lot of it, I don't think.
Well, and that's what I was going to go into when it comes to constructing an artificial intelligence. How much of an interaction with reality will it have? Like,
well, at first, just visual and audio, because that's all I have to work with at the moment.
Right. Well, and so that brings up another question: like how close, like how much of a brain do we want to simulate?
That'll be going into 3. That's a perfect segue into 3. Because I can hopefully you guys see the natural progression of this conversation, and this is the reason why. Like you guys were the ones who did the segues. I mean, I didn't even have to prompt it, Yeah. So hopefully the layout of how I have the information is a nice good flow. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like you said, visual, audio, visual, and that then begins to present for the artificial
Yeah.
intelligence a very limited scope as far as like its perception of reality.
Sure.
Because as humans, we have more senses that allows us to at least receive different types of information
Sure.
from our environment.
But I think one of the reasons why we got kind of messed up a little bit, and I don't mean like messed up. It's just kind of like different path from like all these other animals. Is we kind of turned in on ourselves, like folding into ourselves, our own minds, even our brains ended up getting all these wrinkly things because our brains were growing faster than what our skulls can grow.
Yeah.
Like
there's a really cool
And
explanation
intellectual is
/
one whose
theory.
mind watches itself.
Yeah, and there's some people that argue, and I don't know if I believe this argument, but it was a little kind of like almost like a hit to the head to kind of contemplate. Some people consider that it's possible that the way we think of consciousness now is a new kind of thing, like the humans that are right now, like supposedly something as early as the Roman times, that the individuals there weren't actually experiencing consciousness the way we're experiencing. Like now we've evolved to a certain degree. I'm not sure how much. Yeah, I'm not sure how much I agree with that, but it is like almost a scary thought for me. I think it's a little scary. Well, yeah, no, but I would like to think that the way humans have been around a little bit longer than that. I would like to think that, but
yeah, but at the very least, you can argue that worldview and like cultural values, in the sense.
Values
like,
for sure, but like
not just values,
of me
but
being
also, like,
aware of myself.
Yeah,
that
for example, individualism is
Yeah.
a very recent thing.
Yeah. So
And
who
for
knows
someone-
how? Yeah.
For someone who's never lived in a collectivist society, has no idea, not just how to live that way, but how people perceive.
Yeah, so we're really. I really feel like
And
we're all on a
interesting.
new frontier. Like we're
Yeah,
like we don't
interesting.
really have anyone like ahead of us. Like we're trotting through unmanned frontier, even with our own consciousness.
Yeah. Well, like in
I
an
think.
interesting little segue, it's like relating to the whole, how did our current perceptions of consciousness, like how early that is. Just an interesting little thing to consider is that you can predict when a person has their earliest memories by what culture they're in.
Oh wow!
They've discovered that, like, in America, average is like 2 or 3.
No
whereas
way!
in, like, the Far East, which is a much more collectivist society, most of them, like, places like Korea, Japan, they don't report childhood memories earlier than 5.
Oh my
6,
God!
7.
That is such a fascinating fact.
Because the individual is much more... They've hypothesized that the individual is placed on a higher value in Western societies, so children start thinking of themselves as I earlier.
Man, that is such a fascinating
And they will have impressions.
fact. I have to really. I want to see, like, I want to like chew on that later on to see like how it affects other things that I think about. But that is really super interesting, because what if you have a culture where you just didn't have any of that, like it was more collectiveness, maybe you don't get your first memories until a lot later or something. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, like, phenomena like that is reflected throughout history. Recently, we've been having a discussion about the color blue.
Or even like Facebook, we see ourselves in a way more in depth than how people did with a mirror.
Ancients never saw
Like,
the color blue.
Facebook would be Narcissus' dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like we have folded into our own perception to such a degree now that I sometimes I feel like I make the sin of assuming. This is haven't we started with the technology one? Because I think we were wrapping up on biology.
Well, yeah,
the last little bit I want to throw in on the biology. You were talking about how we've turned in on ourselves. We've turned in on ourselves quickly due to necessity. You can look this up, but the theory goes, humans, our one trait that allows us to survive is that we can run. We can do long distance running. We're not very fast, we're not very strong, but we can outpace any other creature on a long enough timeline. Mm-hmm. What that does our body secretes more fluid that protects and helps the brain grow.
Sure.
Also, just on metabolism, we use and burn ketones.
Sure.
So it goes along. So it goes along with our diet too.
Right.
So the things that help us survive and that helps us grow: fat, carbs, and running.
Sure.
Over a long enough timeline, our brains begin to develop faster and better because we put ourselves in that condition.
So I want to piggyback off of your idea and to take it one or two more steps past that in the timeline of the evolution of the brain. And I'll do this as this is another point about the biology part.
Yeah.
So if you look at animals with primitive brains, like if you go back into primitive animals with primitive brains, it looks like the original purpose of a brain to begin with was to coordinate muscle movements originally. So most animals, the part of their brain most of the time is muscle movements, and maybe before we ended up developing a language. And we didn't have something for the left mind to express itself in. It was predominantly, think about how life might be if you didn't have that voice in your head. If it was just your raw emotion, if you didn't have those inner monologues.
Raw instinct.
Yeah, man.
Well, and think of that raw instinct being like flashcards. Like my dog, she freaked out when there was an outline of a cat on the TV. She was like, "Holy crap, there's a cat!"
Right.
I'm like, this is funny because there's no cat there. But think about your brain trying to survive.
Sure.
It's like, hey, here's a thing that I recognize, and this is how we behave when we recognize it. So, compound that.
Right. So that's everything we're saying right now.
Their associative memory, they tie a stimulus to a reaction, but they don't
Right.
have a linear way to construct that into a narrative. Like emotions are the same way. They're shortcuts in logic. It's not logic properly done. It's like, oh, this.
Sure. So when we started developing language, is the beginnings of developing how we consider consciousness, because I don't think anyone would really feel like they're really conscious if they didn't have that voice, if it was just raw emotion.
Yeah.
And I think it's even that voice that we value, the thing that we wish that goes on. If we're hurt, obviously we don't want to be in pain, but if we can still have that internal monologue going forward, technically you're still alive somehow.
Right. And the major difference that, the one thing that truly does, that they've narrowed down, separates humanity from the rest of the animal kingdom, is the capacity for actual full-on language. Not just communication, but full language.
Okay, yeah. I agree. So, but that pretty much, I'm going to put a pause right here, but that pretty much wraps up, I think, a lot of the major biological arguments. That basically, that we don't have to come as close to the human. I'm doing the same thing with the human brain as I was doing before with reality.
Right.
As far as at the end, I'm just trying, the third step as I start going into it, as I start explaining it, if someone says, well, that doesn't count as a way of doing that because that's not the way it works in the real life. I've already explained how these things work, and this third choice. If in this third chapter part, as I go over, some of those things can't mimic them well, then I'm okay with working with that. But I guess it kind of sets up on why we have technology now that can do it, because we don't have to be close, because we ourselves aren't close.
In other words, what is the bare minimum to pass the Turing test?
Yes, but absolutely. And ideally, it would be, I would feel like if you can form emotional attachments to it, like in the movie Her, that would be a great way.
So you mean to tell me you want an AI that can catfish me? Cause screw that.
Well, I'll take a pause right here and go into